Chairman, first of all, I want to thank you, Mr. Horwitz, for your work, and I want to thank all of the IGs. We have always been, both sides of the aisle, impressed with your efforts, and to your staff, I thank you. Mr. Horwitz, I want to focus on whether Secretary Clinton received, as some of my colleagues put it, special treatment from the FBI and DOJ. On the decision not to prosecute Secretary Clinton, your report found, and I quote, "We found no evidence that the conclusions by the prosecutors were affected by bias or other improper considerations. Rather, we determined that they were based on the prosecutor's assessment of the facts, the law, and past department practice. We want justice department officials to make their decisions based on the facts, the law, and the past department practices." Isn't that correct? Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And your report also concluded that the FBI team interpreted and applied the law to Secretary Clinton in a way that was, and I quote, "consistent with the department's historical approach in prior cases under different leadership, including in the 2008 decision not to prosecute former Attorney General Alberto Gonzales for mishandling classified documents." Is that correct?
That's correct.
But Director Comey did apply a double standard to Secretary Clinton in a way that helped Donald Trump and severely hurt Secretary Clinton. Director Comey followed the department policy and kept secret from the American people the FBI's investigations of the Trump campaign in Russia, but repeatedly ignored department policy and released information about Secretary Clinton. Regarding Director Comey's July 5th, 2016 public statement about his recommendation not to charge Secretary Clinton, your review found, and I quote, "Comey's unilateral announcement was inconsistent with department policy and violated long-standing department practice and protocol by, among other things, criticizing Clinton's uncharged conduct." Can you explain why the department has a policy against criticizing the uncharged conduct of an individual?
Certainly. The department, and actually one of the things that was interesting in the report is we found that it's a norm that's accepted, but there actually isn't a policy that explicitly states that, so that is one of our recommendations. And I would, as we talk about this issue, the reason you don't speak about uncharged conduct, there are many, but it is fairness to the individual. If an individual isn't going to be charged with criminal conduct or wrongdoing, you don't speak about it. Mm-hmm. You speak in court. That's what we've been trained from day one as prosecutors and anybody who's worked in the Justice Department. Mm-hmm. Doing that publicly not only tarnishes an individual, but raises questions of the fairness of justice and applications of various principles, as you indicated. Indeed, as we point out here, while there isn't an explicit policy at the department about not speaking on uncharged conduct in a case where you don't charge any criminal activity, there actually is language that prohibits department prosecutors from speaking about uncharged conduct of co-conspirators. Mm-hmm. And so, in other words, where there is in fact a charge of criminal wrongdoing and a conspiracy, and some individuals in the conspiracy are charged and some individuals aren't charged, and that can happen because there's stronger evidence against some than others, department policy says you can't speak about the uncharged individuals even though you believe they committed a crime. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yet there is no corresponding policy which is on where there are no charges, which is why we make that recommendation in this report.
I see. You also found that Director Cummings' October 28, 2016 letter to Congress about Secretary Clinton, and I quote, originated with Cummings' elevation of maximal transparency as a value overriding, for this case only, the principles of stay silent and take no action that the FBI has consistently applied to other cases. Now, Mr. Horowitz, one of those investigations where Director Comey decided to follow department policy and practice and keep silent was the Russia investigation into allegations of collusion with the Trump campaign. Is that accurate?
It is, and I'll add he also had that policy with regard to the Clinton Foundation.
And so, so say that again. Explain that, what you just said.
So there were two investigations he declined, as we lay out here, to speak about. One was the Russia investigation, and one was an then ongoing Clinton Foundation investigation. In fact, that was the basis for the report about Deputy Director McCabe's misconduct that we released a few months ago.
So do you believe that Secretary Clinton received some favorable action?
I'm not going to sort of judge whether it was favorable to whom or what. I'll just say that it was not consistent with department policy practice, and it shouldn't have been done.
Now, Mr. Horowitz, President Trump and his Republican allies are trying to use your report to discredit Special Counsel Mueller's investigation. Let me read a few headlines from the press about your report, and I'm sure you've seen them. Trump allies, quote, Trump allies seize on DOJ report as they seek to undercut Mueller's probe. Giuliani calls for DOJ to end Mueller probe after IG report. Quote, Trump claims vindication and report on FBI that wasn't about him. And, quote, Republicans want to shut Mueller down over a report that isn't even about him, end of quote. President Trump stated last Friday, and I quote, if you read the IG report, I've been totally exonerated, end of quote. Mr. Horowitz, my copy of your report must be missing a page, or a few pages. Did your investigation examine whether President Trump's campaign colluded with Russia to impact the election, or whether the president obstructed an FBI investigation?
Our report was focused on the Clinton email investigation, and the only place where it touches the Russia matter is with regard to the text messages and then the October decision about the Wiener laptop.
The president also said, and I quote, the Mueller investigation has been totally discredited, end of quote. I don't see that in your report anywhere. Maybe I missed it. Does your report reach any conclusions about the validity or credibility of Special Counsel Mueller's investigation?
As we noted in the report, it relates to the Clinton email investigation, and the Russia matter was not part of this review, other than with the exception I mentioned earlier.
Now, Rudy Giuliani, President Trump's personal attorney, said, and I quote, tomorrow Mueller should suspend his investigation, end of quote. Does your report recommend that the special counsel suspend his investigation?
We don't address issues with regard to the special counsel.
Mr. Giuliani also said, and I quote, the IG report basically tells you that both prongs of the Mueller investigation are either corrupt or answered, end of quote. Did your investigation determine that the special counsel's investigation is corrupt?
Yeah, as I said, our report was concerning the Clinton email investigation.
Well, did your investigation answer the questions being considered in special counsel Mueller's probe?
Same answer.
The conclusion in your report stated, and I quote, and I will finish with this, Mr. Chairman, through the collective efforts of generations of FBI employees, the FBI has developed and earned a reputation as one of the world's premier law enforcement agencies. The FBI has gained this reputation in significant part because of its professionalism impartiality, non-political enforcement of the law, and adherence to detailed policies, practices, and norms. Did you find that the FBI as an institution is corrupt, politically biased, or untrustworthy?
We didn't reach the larger question of, how this broadly affected the FBI beyond noting that, in fact, this kind of conduct undermines that credibility, impacts people's perceptions of the FBI in a way that should never have happened, and is very concerning for all the reasons I think everybody cares about the fair administration of justice.
And I listened very carefully to Chairman Gowdy's questions, which were excellent. And the cloud that you talked about with regard to Ms. Page and Straw and the others that you mentioned, how did you, the method that you used to figure out that their opinions did not have a negative impact, or inappropriate impact on this investigation?
So what we did was,
because that is a crucial question. I mean, in fairness to all, I think it's important that be addressed. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely, Congressman. I think it is very important because, as we've talked about, the language, the messages, the appearance, the implication that any law enforcement officer would be willing to use their authority to impact any election, any individual, whatever side that person is running on or running from, is so antithetical to the core values of justice and the FBI. And so the question we looked at were the comments of the 5 individuals we identified here in looking at their various messages, how did those impact the specific decisions we looked at and then the prosecutor's decision ultimately? Because obviously the prosecutors are the one, despite what Director Comey said publicly, were responsible for making the ultimate decision on whether to charge or not charge. What we did was we questioned witnesses closely. We looked for all the documentary evidence we could. And we looked at the specific decisions. As to the specific decisions we outline here in the report, they were either the result of larger team decisions that were not exclusively within the domain of the individuals who had very troubling messages, or were prosecutors' decision and not the decisions of these individuals. And we also noted that at least for some of these decisions, the individuals are actually seeking more aggressive approaches than the prosecutors were in some regards. So we looked at all of that evidence, and we assessed whether on that record we could make a finding that bias turned into action by those other individuals. And we didn't believe there was evidence to reach that conclusion. Mm-hmm. And as to the prosecutor's decision, it was the prosecutor's decision. And folks can debate and discuss, and there's clearly been a fair amount of it, on whether the precedent and the current and the assessment here on the application of the gross negligence provision was an appropriate application of that provision. But that's a decision that the prosecutors made based on their judgment, as you indicated, looking at
just
the
the
record
last
over
question.
time.
Let me ask you this. In coming to that conclusion that you just talked about, was there, because it seems like we're having an investigation of the investigation of the investigation, but so I ask you this, your staff, the people that you work with, your IG assistants, and
right,
were you all solid behind what you just said, or did you have a lot of you had people saying, nah, like a jury, half of them?
The great thing about having a large team like we had working on this is, much like I've done in other reports, Fast and Furious and others, we sit in a room, sort of hash it out, exchange ideas, but I'm comfortable saying this is the conclusion of all of us in the IG. I obviously am the one who has to and is the one responsible for ultimately issuing this, but that was our team conclusion of it. But I hasten to add, we understand and recognize and state explicitly on how serious the conduct was and how it cast a cloud over the whole investigation. I don't think that can be lost either.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Gentleman from Maryland yields back. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Horowitz, welcome.